Welcome to The Third Story. I'm Leo Sidran. Check this out. What you're hearing here came right off of side B of a 90-minute Fuji cassette tape. The tape is labeled Depends, Funk Session, Wednesday, February 4th, 1998. How many cassette tapes of funk jams are there out there? How many of these jam sessions are archived in shoeboxes in somebody's parents' basement? Why do we record all the jams? What do we expect that they'll become? Well, sometimes they become part of history. This one, for example, I believe has never been heard in public before now. And that guitar solo that you hear, the one that sounds like it's being played by someone who's heard a lot of Charlie Hunter records recently, that's a young John Mayer doing his thing. And this saxophone player right here, that's a young Bob Reynolds. Just a couple of young, enthusiastic music school kids getting into it back when the world was simpler, back when MySpace literally meant the space around me, and when streaming was just something that happened to mascara in the rain. I remember a few years later when John Mayer's first record came out. I was really excited to discover it. I related so much to the quarter-life crisis that he sang about and the musicality of the whole thing. And I was especially curious about the title of the record, Room for Squares, which was an obvious nod to the late great saxophone player Hank Mobley's classic record, No Room for Squares. It was like John was sending us a little message, a secret little code to those of us who knew how to decipher it. He was saying, see, I'm hip. He was saying, I know jazz people too. I think Bob Reynolds was one of those people. Bob has gone on to make 10 solo records, many of them enjoyed chart success on Billboard. He's a well-known teacher, especially online, where he developed his own platform called the Virtual Studio. And he has a popular YouTube channel where he shares ideas, stories, and techniques. But ever since those days of that funk jam in college, he's also been comfortable as the jazz element in a more kind of pop or mainstream setting. He loved, for example, the way Branford Marsalis worked with Sting in the 80s and 90s. And you can hear that on this track from his most recent record, Runway. I mean, Bob is also down to play some bebop, too. For example, here's a little track from his nod to Hank Mobley, an album that he put out in 2019 called A Message for Mobley. Man, what's going on with these guys and Hank Mobley? I mean, I like it. I really like it, but wow, just like, wow. This year, as we know, so many musicians and creative people have had to confront themselves, their work, and their ambitions head on. And I found Bob right in the middle of that confrontation, at the crossroads of what's happening and where am I going. And we had a beautiful talk about managing that existential crisis that so many of us are having. And also we talked about his influences, some strategies that he uses, the subtle but significant distinction between practice and the practice. And he told a bunch of beautiful stories from the road, including the one where he found himself on tour in Spain and Italy last March, just as COVID was descending on Europe. Third-story.com is the place to go to sign up, subscribe, say hello, and check the archive. There are so many conversations in that index that tie in sweetly to this one. Certainly the ones with Mike League of Snarky Puppy, Larry Goldings, Eric Harland, Rick Beato, other saxophone players including John Ellis, Ben Wendell, Rudresh Mahanthapa, and Chris Potter, or the episode with Ryan Groos, Bob's old friend, who incidentally provided me with the Funk Jam cassette. Visit the website to pull on all those threads, or head over to patreon.com/thirdstorypodcast to get involved on a deeper level. As always, I've curated a Spotify playlist and some video clips that relate to our conversation, and you can find all those at the website too. Here's my talk with Bob Reynolds, me in New York, he in LA, we on Zoom, you a fly on the wall. There's this sort of sub-theme that has run through so many of these conversations that I've had about musicians who switch coasts. Like there's a whole crew of LA cats who ended up in New York, and there's this whole kind of like migration out here. And then you've got this other thing happening, which I'm going to apply to you, which is the reverse migration from east to west. And I know that that's a pendulum that's been swinging for years. And on the one hand, was a function of where the business was and where opportunity was. But today, I generally tend to ask people why they do it because it's less clear, I think, today than it used to be, like why you would choose one coast over another. Do you think some of it is disposition? I mean, is there a West Coast disposition? In part, I see you as a very outward-facing, positive person with a willingness to be really open and forthcoming and share a big part of your personal process and even your personal life with your fans, not just the music. There's a thing in New York sometimes I think that's a little darker around the edges, and you seem just kind of sunnier as a person.
That's a really great observation. I wouldn't for a minute say that those things you just said, that I was aware of them or they led me there or something. I agree with what you're saying. Like there is a certain edge to New York that's unique to New York, I think, to some degree. And I actually was pretty concerned that if I was legitimately concerned that somehow my playing or whatever, my abilities would suffer from leaving New York. I was like, definitely like, what happened? I just thought that would happen. And a little bit of what I found was upon convincing myself, like, okay, we're going to give this a try. And if it doesn't work, we'll know what this is and we can come back. And we still had plenty of friends in New York and everything. My wife is a dancer by training, like ballet, and then was dancing in modern companies. And actually at that time, we sort of left at the peak of, she was dancing with the New York City Opera and the Metropolitan Opera and doing all these really cool things. Anyway, so that was the idea. We'll give it a chance. When I remember, though, very specifically coming back to play at the 55 bar for the first time after having moved from New York to LA. And yeah, like I was really concerned, right? That, oh my gosh, I'm going to like lose my edge or whatever. So I played this show and the reverse was true. It was maybe the most fun I'd had playing there in years. And I realized that, I mean, I'm just generally pretty insecure. So I realized that prior to that, like when I was living in New York, and this is, some of it is maybe is just age too, but whenever I would be playing at the 55 bar or Smalls or, you name it, any of the places, there was like some part of me that was always looking to the back of the room to see like who's here and who's listening. Like, oh, I have to impress so-and-so. I got to make sure that I'm playing a certain way for, these musicians that would be, just whatever. I wasn't even necessarily aware of it, that it was happening that way. But after I moved and then I came back, it was just, I felt so much lighter. I didn't feel that same thing, whatever that thing that I had that I was carrying around. Anyway, for me personally, it just turned out to be the inverse of what I was concerned about. Well, some might argue otherwise, but that's how it felt to me anyway. Like when I thought of LA and music, and maybe in particular LA and jazz, when I was coming up in high school, it was GRP and it was like a certain sound. It was like studio jazz, no judgment one way or the other. Just like that was what I thought. Like, you thought jazz in LA, a certain set of albums, players, and sounds came to mind. Jazz in New York, a very different one. And I think that's changed so drastically. It's like such a different thing.
I think it's interesting when you talk about that voice in your head that's criticizing you or telling you to play in a certain way. And I wonder if you can pinpoint or define what you think that certain way is. I get it. I mean, I think that there's a part of you musically that doesn't sound like it's coming out of New York right now. It's got a different thing about it. And I wonder if maybe you were aware of that on some level also.
Yeah, I mean, I still am, and hopefully a little less to some degree, but I always have been and probably still am sort of ever trapped in this thing between, like some artists are really, like, I don't even mean to refer to myself that way. That feels weird to even refer to, but by virtue of the fact that I do make music and stuff, let's just use it and go with it. Some people are super confident in what they do. They're like, they know who they are as an artist, and they're like, just this is my thing, and I do this thing. And I have never felt that way. Or certainly it's taken a lot of time to even get closer to what that might be. But I'm just sort of somebody who's riddled with self-doubt and sort of imposter syndrome and whatever. And so the other side of that is that I have a certain way maybe that I approach working on, my instrument or the craft or whatever, that I'm like trying to I'm aware of a very high bar and people that I look up to. So like I always want to be able to feel like I'm where I need to be, on that ladder. Like, And so I guess when I was in New York, some of that manifested in, just like, oh, I need to play a certain way so that these 2 or 3 people that I look up to or peers or whatever will be like, oh yeah, man, he's killing, like it's not necessarily the way of playing or the music that I don't even know what word to hear to say should play, but I mean, it's part of me. I'm able to do it and I can enjoy it, but there's a little bit of a conflict between that sort of just trying to be really outstanding at the thing that you do and what is actually that inner voice thing. Like, what would you do if you didn't know anything about those people? You didn't care. Like, what would that music sound like? And for me, over time, I've found that I get closer to that, the more vulnerable I'm able to be, with a group of people I'm playing with and also for an audience, et cetera. Like, so it's not about playing in a certain way that's going to make musicians go, woo, but I came out of that culture. I mean, I went to school, where that was the thing. You wanted to play recitals where, musicians were going, woo. So like, it took me a long time to sort of, I don't know, shed, not meaning practice, but like relinquish those shackles to some degree. And I find that I'm maybe at my most pure kind of whatever it is that I do musically when I can be so far away from that. And some of the most fun I have playing music is when I'm able to be, when I feel confident enough and comfortable with people I'm playing with to leave a lot of space and to not, it's definitely, I'm not somebody who shines their brightest when it's all about pyrotechnics. It's like I can do certain things, but that's just not the main place that I think am coming from sort of really on a deeper level. So being out here, I think allowed me some space for that to get away from the side of me it just was so easy to like, I'd go out, if I'd go hear any number, I could list any number of amazing players. And I would then the next day be like, oh my God, like it was that feeling of you hear Joel Fromm play and you're a saxophone player and you're just like, oh my God, what am I doing with my life? Like that guy is just amazing. So then do I spend the next day trying to be like Joel Fromm, like, cause that's going to make me a better sax player. And I could list so many names there. He's just the one that popped to mind. But like Aaron Goldberg once told me, the piano player, Aaron Goldberg, we were playing a session at his house in Brooklyn. It's a long time ago. And he was like a subtle conversation we had about some of this. He was one of the first people that gave me confidence as a writer. He played my music and he was maybe the first person that played my music in such a way that it came to life. And it was like, whoa, okay. He enjoyed it. He was excited by it. He had fun with it. And that was empowering and encouraging to me. Prior to that, I had taken a lot of my music to various jazz sessions, in New York, only to have it get that sort of like, feel like I was somebody was looking down their nose at me or like it wasn't quite hip enough or, like, oh, I should write this way or I should write that way. And Aaron Goldberg was the first person to say, man, forget that stuff. There already is Mark Turner. There already is Chris Potter. He's like, this is you. Like, you need to do this. Nobody else does this. And that was a real big moment for me because to have somebody that I admired so much and respected so much kind of present it to me that way was huge. And he and Eric Harland and Reuben Rogers, like those were the first 3 guys that gave me that permission. And not only gave me that permission, but showed excitement about whatever I was bringing to the table that up until that point, I was just really shy about.
I totally recognize in the music that you make what you're describing, but I see it as a real kind of boldness and confidence to work with those musicians and have them play the music that you write, because as you say, it's not so much about pyrotechnics. It's much more melodic, and it's much more about space. And in some ways, it's more accessible than a lot of the music that I think a lot of your contemporaries that you're talking about would be making. And you described earlier how you're riddled with self-doubt and, have felt paralyzed by it. And at the same time, you seem to have channeled that energy into output, into making records, and project by project having a concept and developing that concept and choosing personnel to work with. So from the outside, it doesn't look like you're insecure. I mean, I think you tend to share your insecurity through your YouTube channel and through just talking to your whoever wants to listen about what you're going through. But musically, I don't read it that way at all. I read it as sort of the opposite of that.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, I'm happier that it comes out that way than the reverse. I can't really say where and when that sort of shift pivoted, but definitely after years of sort of chasing a template that I, was raised into this template, like here's how it works. You get really good. You get called to play with people who are better, and they pump you up. Then eventually a record label sees you. And, this was this whole thing, like from the 90s into that sweet spot, that heyday of the whatever, jazz and CD sales and all that stuff. So that's what I grew up into. And basically, the core of that model is that you need to be picked. Somebody has to choose you. Somebody has to say, yes, this person. And so that leads back to a little bit what we were talking about before, where I was like, I want to make these records. I want to be able to find people to play the music I write with at the level I want that to be at, et cetera, et cetera. And so it was this sort of constantly trying to figure out what that path was going to be. And, all I could do was look to the people that I admired and look at their path. And I was always trying to sort of copy those blueprints, but, that doesn't work. I mean, most of the time it doesn't work. So at some point, it just became about, well, this is not going to work. Like the phone is not going to ring for me in that way, just generally speaking. I'm not going to get picked by the people I want to get picked by. So if I want to make the things that I want to make, like I just am going to have to figure out how to do that on my own. And that was the beginning of the journey toward sort of self-reliance in that way, not relying on a record label or all the traditional things, and not chasing those things anymore. And so what I found was the more I was able to develop that, and then later on, things like you mentioned, like through my YouTube videos and such, it just sort of seemed to grow in its own way and build upon itself in that way. And so the more that I did that stuff, the more confident I became in the best sense of that word, confident in myself for being sincere. And I don't know. It's certainly a constant process, constant journey.
I think that idea of sincerity is worth exploring a little bit because, like I said, I feel like I know about you and I know you a little bit by watching some of the videos. As a matter of fact, I had a half hour before we started talking today and I thought, oh, you know what? I'll just go watch a couple more videos. And I went down this rabbit hole of watching your tour diary from last year, right when COVID started.
Oh
and I was like, man, I can't believe I didn't even know about that. I got to talk to him about that. But there's so much of you that is presented in it. And, I was talking to our mutual friend Ryan Gruss the other day about another video that I had seen where you went to Texas to work on the Snarky Puppy record. And, you get off the plane and you're like, man, God, I think I brought the wrong axe with me. I think I brought the wrong saxophone, and anybody who spent any time around saxophone players recognizes that saxophone player neurosis of constantly dealing with the equipment and dealing with the gear and this new mouthpiece. I don't know if I can't believe I brought this horn and I hope I didn't bring the wrong, and you're just totally out there, just letting it all hang out in front of everybody. There's no mystery about what the process is. There's a vulnerability that I think does translate as sincerity and somehow strengthens the relationship with those who care to engage with it rather than making them in some way feel like, oh man, this guy, he doesn't even know what saxophone to take to the gig.
Right.
It's like you feel more connected to the whole thing.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to put it. I suppose at some level I'm aware that, so I have all these sort of insecurities and such, but I'm also aware that I do my job well, whatever that might be at the time, whether it's working with as a sideman or doing my own thing. I put a lot of care and a lot of effort, and I've put a lot of years into it. So I know that I'm a professional at what I do. And so all these little things that I'm talking about, they're on a higher surface level.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh my gosh, well, I know how to actually play this instrument. We're talking about smaller things. However, I think what you're getting at is that there's maybe a relatability there, because we all have that for ourselves in one way or the other with something or some things. And maybe through my sharing it that way, I think it's just that human thing where people are able to be like, oh my gosh, I do that too. Like, that's what I hear from people often, or would hear from people after shows and such, like, oh my gosh, I saw this video and it was so great because I totally go through the same thing or whatever. I mean, that's it. It's literally the human element of whatever is going on. And so I don't think too much about it when I do it. And all of those videos are basically me riffing with the camera as whatever is happening is happening. And sometimes I edit them quickly and right after, and sometimes I sit on them for a long time. And like those Snarky Puppy things, I finally got around to just, like, oh, I'm going to put this together. But those moments when they happened were the real and raw moments of then, or whatever it was that was going on. So I'm trying to it's a weird thing. If I even think about it too much, it's like, that is the most bizarre, who are you even talking to? But when I'm doing it, it's like I'm just talking to you. It's just one person. It just happens to be maybe there's more than one person who ends up seeing it.
Did you always document stuff, even coming up? Were you the guy who recorded every rehearsal on the Walkman? I mean, was that part of your thing?
A little bit, and also not exactly. I wouldn't say that I was an avid documenter of like everything, but I would record rehearsals, and I would record gigs and stuff when I could, when I started having the equipment, not video back then, but at least audio, but not like cataloging it wasn't sort of a neurotic kind of thing. Like, oh my gosh, if I'm playing, it has to be recorded. It was sort of haphazard, but the video component that came along, within the last 5-6 years is actually a little bit more of a throwback to my life before I ever met the saxophone. So when I was not even quite a teenager, when I was like maybe 10, 11, 12 years old, I thought I wanted to be a movie director. I thought I wanted to be Steven Spielberg. That was my goal. And I had a little camera at home. I mean, this is way back when. So if only I had the amazing tools that are available today. But I didn't. I had my mom's like super heavy VHS camera, and I was just always making these little movies, and then like would rope my friends in, and then the movies, when I would show them to my friends and family, the credits would roll, and every credit would be basically me, like written by, produced by, starring, like everything, except for music. It'd be like music by Vanilla Ice. It would just be like whatever was on the radio that I could dub in, And that's what led me to band, and then eventually the saxophone. So I was making movies before I was playing the saxophone. Mm-hmm. And so the funny thing about doing this stuff is, and when I was a kid, I was an actor too. I did like commercials and stuff at a couple of different times, not super heavily, but it was mostly a way to save up money to buy surfboards or camera gear or whatnot. I didn't ever have I didn't feel like I wanted to do that. I never even liked it that much, but it was something that sort of happened and I went with it. And I was always interested. It put me in places where I got to like hang out with the camera people and be like, whoa, what's that? So that whole aspect was in my realm before music ever showed up. So when I was doing those things, what we're talking about with like the YouTube videos, it was a little bit of like a chance to get back to that and really have fun playing with, like, I've become terrible about being consistent with it. And people are always like, you need to get an editor. The problem is like the editing is the art for me. That's the whole fun is that, to outsource that to somebody else. Yeah, I might be able to turn out the videos faster, but that's actually the most fun part of it. That's where I get to tell the story. And so that's the medium that I've been able to play with and have a lot of fun with. And I just basically, somebody's got to be there to narrate the thing. So that's me.
No, and it has a language and a tone and a style and a pacing and all of the values that you would look for in sort of visual storytelling. It's interesting. I talked to Rick Beato a couple weeks ago. Do you know who he is?
Yeah.
And his trajectory is a little bit different, and one of the significant differences, he said the same thing about editing, though. He said, the thing is that the editing is where all of the content really gets kind of shaped.
Yeah.
And so you can't outsource that. And frankly, I feel the same way about this podcast. I'm also struggle with consistency. I shoot for one a week. I hit about one every 10 days. And then there was certainly 2 and 3 week spans when I just can't get it together. And part of that is because I'm working, and as much as money as I'm able to generate through Patreon on this project, it's not enough that I can turn a gig down.
Right.
And Rick is living on his videos. He basically stopped making records and stopped doing all of the stuff that led him to be the guy who made the videos, and he's doing the videos full time. I was thinking about you and your relationship with videos, and I think to your relationship with the videos because it's happening around your career as a musician and a teacher and everything else that you do, and it's happening as a kind of as a conversation with the rest of your life. It isn't all that you're doing.
Yeah.
But it got me thinking, like, was there a part of you that thought, well, maybe I'll grow this thing and monetize it enough and this will be my income, my career?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely crossed my mind, or like, is it possible? And I know that there are plenty of people doing that, that it's easy to see. And then I actually do know some people personally, not in music, but who have started YouTube channels even within, the last like 3 years and been incredibly successful with what they've done. So yeah, it has crossed my mind. But back to the sort of sincerity thing, like I have to, for me, it's important to try to, I mean, if I try to steer too far away from like whatever my core says I'm supposed to be doing, I get into trouble. So like, here's an example. I know what the game is on YouTube. If you want to grow I know what the things are that you need to do if you want to like grow a channel and make all this ad money and stuff. But I just can't bring myself to make a thumbnail with a white outline and like a bunch of crazy text and all the rules that you're supposed to follow, that when the clickbait headline, and like I know what those things are. And I know that if I made those videos, they would get higher numbers of everything, than if I just made a video that has some sort of innocuous title and just a dumb thumbnail of me, who nobody's searching for that video. So the only video that's for are the already converted, basically, the people who are already there. I do wrestle with that, like knowing what I know. Am I just stupid for not capitalizing on it, or no? Because, and I have to, and this, like Leo, my wife could tell you, like, this is a conversation I have with myself out loud too much, probably. And not specifically just the YouTube thing, but it's almost a general thing. And what I constantly come back to is, well, the way that I feel after I like make some video and put it out, like that moment, it's like putting out a record. You know how when you make a record and like the best time, well, I shouldn't put this on you, but I'll say for me, the most favorite time is that music is like is just before I release it. That's when I'm listening to it the most. Nobody's heard it yet. And like once it's out, I almost never hear it again. I don't ever want to hear it again. But I will love my record the most like in the weeks leading up to it coming out, because it's like I have this little secret and I've worked really hard on it and I really like it and I hope other people are going to like it too. But right at this moment, I love it and I think it's the best thing ever. And then once it's out, like, please, I don't want to hear it. Like my kids will ask to listen to one of my CDs. And I'm like, no, you got to listen to that when I'm not in the car. I can't hear that. And it's similar with making a video. So when I make one and I feel that way about it, the greatest joy I get is from putting it up and sharing it then, more so than like how many views did it get and did it make a certain amount of ad revenue. So I don't even monetize my channel in the advertising sense. I've flirted with it. I've like sometimes put ads on and then take them off. I realize though that at least at this moment, and I reserve the right to change my mind in the future, but so far I like that platform is just like a big canvas for me to play with, and that it's not something that I'm like, there's so many metrics that are staring you in the face. You can't ignore them. So yes, it's a little bit disheartening when I haven't put up in a video in a while and I have to log in and then I see it and they're like, your views are down. Like, yeah, my views are down. I haven't done anything on the platform in 3 months. But the point is, when I make something, I like that it's not tied to money there. Yeah. I'm not making the video for ad dollars. So I'm not optimizing the title and I'm not doing all the things that you need to do on YouTube to make that professional leap. I don't know. Every time I try to get close to it, I just get a like sort of a yucky feeling. This is just me personally. That's all. And at the end of the day, like that's the thing, right? To not thine own self be true. I mean, that's it, right?
I hear you. I really, really hear that. Everything that you say, I relate very deeply to it. And I am compelled and driven to do a lot of the stuff that I do for similar reasons. Even to the point where you say, your wife would tell me that you have this conversation out loud more often than you care to admit. I know what you're talking about. And in part, it's like, am I a fool for not thinking about this in terms of business? Especially when you know people who are very successful in business, and it's just a tweak of the mentality. On the other hand, I have convinced myself that, or at least what I wanted for myself as a musician and as somebody who makes music adjacent content or whatever, I wanted it all to be coherent. I wanted that if somebody heard me play and never heard my podcast, that they would still have a sense of who I am. And if they heard my podcast and never heard me play, they would also sort of have a sense of what I'm about. And that it all kind of adds up to something that makes sense as a whole.
Yeah.
And I do think that is happening with you. And, so I wonder if you feel like, have you converted, do you think it's converted even to listeners, or when you've gone on the road that you meet people who have a connection to you because of the videos and
my
that
gosh.
stuff?
Yeah. The video connection is undeniable. Obviously things being a little different right now, but I was touring a lot up until all the pandemic stuff. And that was a constant, that thing I would hear, whether I was out at the signing table after a Snarky Puppy show or out at the table after one of my own shows. The majority of the conversations I would have with people somehow would wind up referencing the videos on YouTube. And I loved that. Like, I mean, everything you just expressed a little while ago about watching one before this, I loved that they felt like they knew me or whatever. And I also know that I'm not putting on airs to do it or whatever. Like what you see is pretty much what you get. Obviously I edit them, but I'm not acting like a different person in them, I guess, so,
yeah.
So that connection was real, and there's just no denying that it led to people showing up to my shows to see like the other part of me, that, the music. I mean, those videos on YouTube, I'm not just featuring my music, right? It's the life part. So then that connection, people then, if I'm coming through to play, like they want to go see that person that they feel a connection to. So all of that, I am aware of how wonderful that is, what a great opportunity that is, and what a privilege that is to have those people out there who are interested in it. And conversely, I also feel a sense of guilt when I'm not like participating in it. Like one lady said to me after a show in England, a sweet lady, we played a show in London, and I don't know, if I had to guess, I would say she was in her early 70s, late 60s maybe. And in a very sort of dry British way, she said something along the lines of like, yeah, love your videos. Interesting that you got all these people watching and then you just like hang them out to dry for a while. Because I hadn't posted anything recently.
Oh.
And I was like, oh my gosh, wow, sorry. But so I feel a little bit bad when I'm disconnected from that. But whatever. That I'm constantly trying to figure out what that is and how I want to be and use that thing, that channel. But it absolutely has become, my mom says this, like it's become a part of my body of work. Like just as much as I have a dozen albums or something, but I have like 300 videos on there. And, half of them are these whatever vlog kind of things, lifestyle things. That actually was never my intent, but it's part of whatever the body of work is that's there now. And it's a really cool thing. And there's an author that I've followed for a long time who's been I would consider him a mentor from a distance, even though we've never met. But have you ever heard of Seth Godin?
No.
It's hard to put a label on him, but he's a blogger, an author, a kind of marketing guy, but in the most amazing sense of that word. He's just always been about building, your tribe, kind of is his ethos. And I mean, I think for probably close to 20 years he's written a blog post every day, every single day on his blog. His consistency is just insane. And they're short, whatever, but anyway, the quote from him that stays with me, one of many, is he said on an interview a long time ago, he's like, at some point I decided to spend my time writing for my readers rather than finding more readers for my writing. It's a harder hill to climb. It's a slower hill. But what I've seen is that it's a more sustainable one with deeper connections. So while this isn't actually possible, my sort of operating manual for how I work through my all parts of my career is that I kind of come at it like I'm trying to scale a one-to-one relationship as much as possible, but I'm coming at it from that standpoint. So whether it's on tour and like I'll talk to every last person at the, like some people are like, oh man, I can't be bothered to go out and sign CD. Like, I'm like, are you kidding me? There's people who want to talk to me after the show. The whole band has gone back to the hotel. I'll be there till the last person. Whether it's with my band or Snarky or whatever, responding to emails, whatever. Like over time, I've had to work with that because I can't handle all of it, but I'm coming from a place of wanting to, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, the numbers and all this stuff like that. Yeah. Could I go do things differently and explode the YouTube channel and blow this up and advertise here? Yeah, I'm sure I could do those things, but I'm trying to navigate my way through it all in a way that I can constantly look back and be proud of whatever I did, even if it takes me longer.
Well, and you're still dealing with the horn too. I mean, the other thing is that this is happening around the music.
Yeah.
It's not replacing the music, it's happening around it.
Right. That's true. Yeah. Like you were saying about with Rick, like, yeah, it's not something that I want to let go. You kind of said it perfectly about trying to have the whole thing integrated in such a way that if a person hears one thing and not the other, they still get the sense of who you are. Yeah. And that's beautiful. I feel the same way. And so I wrestle a lot with sort of, trying to balance all these things and figure out, do I do better when I try to do a little bit each day? Or am I better when I just like, this day is only about X and the next day is only about Y? And basically every week I try new things and, I fall on my face and I try again and I try over. And a lot of that is what ends up finding its way into these various, things that we're talking about. There's something that's like, I feel like I'm on a quest to figure out there's like this right way. If I find the right thing, then everything will line up. And the other part of me knows that that's also stupid. It's not, there isn't this one thing that you're going to find, but every day, every week, it's kind of the same thing. Like, well, maybe if I try it this way, I'll practice first and then I'll get to all those emails. And then it's like, oh my gosh, I missed this, that, and the other. Okay, tomorrow I'll take care of all the emails and then I'll practice and then I'll do this. And, but I also have kids and everything. And that changes things in a wonderful way, but just causes you to reallocate and rebalance different things. So it's a developing story.
There's always been a part of me that was interested in doing a lot of things and generally didn't stop myself from doing them. And I saw friends who had like a hyper focus on one thing or a couple of things, and they achieved a level of excellence in whatever that thing is that I know I won't or can't or don't at least even attempt to achieve. I tell myself and have always told myself that it's because I have all these balls in the air. And whenever I disappoint myself or I feel like I'm not living up to the level that, I identify enormously with you saying, when you keep the company of the people who are operating at the highest level, it's impossible not to hold yourself to that standard.
Yeah.
So for years, my defense mechanism has been to say, but see, they're not also doing this other thing. And they're also not trying to do these other things. That has kept me, to the extent that I am productive. And I think it's also prevented me from achieving the level that I would like to achieve in any of the things that I do.
Yeah, man, that's so true. I feel the same way. And we both know plenty of people who have that laser focus, that hyper focus. And some part of you wonders, well, what if I see that, I know what they're doing. So what if I just did that? I think about that every day. I've thought about that, especially during this whole pandemic situation. It's really been a wrestling match with myself when it comes down to the horn part of it, because I've realized that, all right, I was so busy with all the things before, and there was traveling mixed in with the videos and the teaching, and there was so many things. So I was like optimizing, efficient. And then to have all this time and come face to face with the reality that given a lot more time, I'm not actually interested in just like playing the saxophone all day long. And that's like a weird thing because I'm like, well, wait a minute, but I'm a saxophone, but like that's what I do. And shouldn't I now be like quadrupling down on that? Like you're just saying, but I also have all these other interests. I also have other responsibilities. There's a mix of things. And so it's been very interesting to sort of navigate it because I think about that every single day. I will walk into this room that I'm in right now and I'll be like, what would Michael Brecker do with this time? Like, I know what he would be doing. Why am I not doing that? Like, just do it. Why don't I do that? But I'm clearly not Michael Brecker or so many other people. But I think about that every day. Like, wow, if I just laser focused, imagine what I could do. But I guess it gets back to, what is it that you really want to accomplish and figure that out. I know that for me, the saxophone is a tool. It's part of a bigger picture. It's not the be all end all. It's certainly the head of the snake or whatever you want to use to call it. It's like absolutely the most forward facing thing to some degree, but figuring out that balance is it's challenging for me. And it's interesting to me because the older I get, the more I realize like it is not the one defining thing. And yet I also know how important it is to me to be able to play the instrument at a certain level or in a certain way and have those abilities. And there's no way around me being able to do that other than time spent working on it.
Yeah.
And so, I'm always sort of juggling those things.
I think it's such a conflict for people who have chosen to follow a non-traditional path, like becoming a saxophone player. In order to do that, even if you have all the support of your family or whatever, even if you demonstrated talent at an early age and had opportunity, it's still such a non-traditional thing to do. It's still such a radical thing to do, considering what most people decide to do with their lives, that to be confronted with the idea, especially sort of midway down the track, that you go, man, I'm not sure if this is all I want to eat, sleep, and breathe. And that's happened to me this year also when it came to music, where I found it challenging, much like you describe. And I think it's an existential dilemma because here, my whole life is organized around this thing. Every decision that I've made as an adult has been, and even as a teenager, was to get to the point where I could look somebody in the eyes and not feel like it's a lie when I say I'm a musician,
Yeah.
And then here you are saying, but I don't think I want to spend all this extra time with the instrument. So what does that say?
So I mean, man, that's exactly it. And I got to say, it's nice to hear that you have experienced some of that too. Because like I think there's a second level where I'll compound whatever I'm feeling about everything we just talked about with the next level is be like, oh my gosh, I really shouldn't be feeling that way. And so that kind of goes to another place. But when I first moved to LA, I had scored, done the music for a short, like a student film thing. And I had this other thing sort of in the hopper. A few years after being in LA, I was working on a series of projects doing the music for these short episodic things. I was spending a lot of time, all my time doing that, to the point where there was no time to even really get to the horn at all, for basically for weeks. And so the problem with that is that as anybody who plays an instrument reasonably well and has taken time away from it knows, then when you come back to it, you're left with this sort of scarring knowledge of what you could do 10 days before or 6 months before, whatever that time horizon is. And so when you go back to pick up the guitar, the trumpet, the saxophone, whatever, it's not that blissful thing you had on your first time climbing that mountain, when it was all like progress. Now it's just like you're confronted with the knowledge that you have lost certain skills or certain things are rusty or whatever. And that is disheartening.
Yes.
So I have like done that roller coaster many, many, many times in my life. I realized, sort of to counter balance what we were just talking about, when I was doing all that film scoring work, which is kind of one of the things I thought I was headed out here to do. Like some part of me thought maybe that there would be like a clean break. Actually, that's for sure what I thought. Cause I thought, I don't see myself staying in New York and life sort of freeze framing where it is right now for the long run. I do want to grow and develop in all realms of life, have a family, financially, like career wise, all these things. And I thought, well, maybe, I've always film scoring, maybe it was my first passion, blah, 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 blah. So there was a bit of an irony in that after I moved to LA to sort of not leave the saxophone behind, but I thought I was going to put it a little bit more in the distance. And the irony is that after I moved to LA, I feel like that's where like things really started to take off for me as a saxophone player. So I was spending all this time working on these film things, and it was really cool. But I then had to deal with like this other side, which was I felt this deep sense of almost loss from like losing my connection to the instrument. And so that made me realize how much, that is the thing. That's sort of the center of the wheel for me. So there's a lot of spokes off of it, but that's the center of it. So if I look back at a journal of mine from 10 years ago, I'm basically complaining to myself about very similar, if not the same things as I would be today.
Yeah.
Which is weird. But, so there's plenty of changes too. But now, this stage of life and everything, the age and everything, you just start to kind of, it's a little bit of an existential thing, just kind of trying to figure out, well, okay, wow, because I have set up everything in my life, my knowing life, from as a teenager on to be this and work around this. And so then you're going like, okay, well, wow, here we are. What's next? Or what do I want to, what do I keep doing exactly this? Do I do more of it? Do I diversify? Do I, these kinds of questions. And I often have to wrestle with that, that voice on my shoulder. It's like, yeah, but so-and-so and so-and-so, they're just like totally focused. And why aren't you doing that?
Early on in the pandemic, I had a conversation with John Ellis, who I talked to pretty regularly. And he said, man, I disagree with this concept of paying dues. For musicians, we always think that somehow we pay dues to be able to, move on from that. And he said, but if you pay your dues, what it's going to do is open up more dues for you to pay. I mean, you play these gigs so that you get called to play another gig. You never, if you're a musician, you never outgrow the gig.
Yeah.
All you're looking for is the next gig, which means you're always paying dues. Your whole life is paying dues.
Totally.
If you're lucky as a musician.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very true. I mean, and I pay dues for the union, but I have to pay them every year. And I didn't get to stop paying them,
right. You're out of the union if you stop paying them.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And actually that's a place where I am very much right now. Like I don't know Mark Turner personally, the saxophonist.
Yeah.
But I've thought about him a lot. Mark, if you're listening, ever hearing this podcast, hello and deep respect. But I've thought about him a lot because I've read about him a lot. I know he's, I guess, a Buddhist or practicing Buddhist, or, he's like a super Zen dude. And I know he also has kids and such. But where I'm going with this is that I look up to him a lot, aside from the player, but just his approach to not practicing, but the practice. Like this idea that the practice is the thing. Like that's the, I don't want to call it the religion, but, just whether the daily practice or whatever, it's something that I'm trying to get closer to that. Like, don't think of it as like this thing you have to do to maintain your skill set, but instead look at it with great gratitude as like what a gift it is to have something in your life that is a practice that you will continually just be working on, and different people will call it different things, but that's the connection. That's sort of the act of service. That's the way you sort of find and develop yourself, and then can also give that out to other people. And so I think sometimes I know I resist that. That's a whole nother topic. It's like we tend to often resist the things that we definitely should be doing. But that's something I'm working on,
Yeah. You talk about how you were on the road a lot leading up to this. And I actually do want to talk about the story that you tell about being on the road right as COVID hit. But before we get there, a big part of your road life has been, as a kind of sideman, but in a very kind of high-end space, playing with John Mayer and playing with Snarky Puppy and playing with bands that, really have large profiles.
Yeah.
That in itself is kind of a lane, I mean, not a lot of saxophone players are able to sort of find their way through that space. Did you sort of wake up one day and say to yourself, "Oh, hey, I'm one of those guys. I'm one of the guys who does tours with tour buses"?
I think I wanted to be on a tour bus for a long time before I got to be on a tour bus. I just fantasized and idolized that thing from probably since the first Behind the Music I saw, as a kid. I wouldn't say that it's something that motivated me in terms of practicing, or like even the way I played the music or the type of music I was chasing. Do you know this guy Jonah Smith, singer songwriter?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so Jonah and I played in Jonah's band for years, like from Boston through New York, 5-6 years more maybe. But anyway, it was like a 4 or 5 piece band. This was my early time in New York. I was out on the road with Jonah Smith and that band more than I was playing like Cleopatra's Needle and jam sessions and hanging with the jazz crew in New York, because I know some part of me was like, I think Jonah's got a better chance of making it, whatever that is, with quotes, maybe making it to the tour bus than I do as like Bob, the jazz saxophone player. And I kind of wanted to maybe use Dave Matthews and Leroy Moore as a model, or like Branford with Sting. Like those were things that I thought about. I liked the idea of that, of being able to do what I do in those bigger environments. Not for the reason that maybe you would think it's not so much about like fame, money, size of crowd, more that those entities I saw as ways of like reaching more people with music in a way that just lined up with my inner way of feeling and thinking about music, if that makes sense. Like I just, and wow, what an amazing thing that I've gotten to experience that in different ways, to play to really large audiences. It doesn't mean all the time, but sometimes have that experience and get to realize that you can actually kind of interact and play with and reach them in the same way as in a small club with 25 people in it. So I don't know, that template was in my mind. I never saw myself being the front person for that. So even though I grew up in the era of like Kenny G on the radio and everywhere.
But with you, you know what I think about Sanborn? What I was thinking about for you as I prepared to talk to you was the model was Dave Sanborn. Michael Brecker to some extent, but somebody who was an instrumentalist.
Yes.
But operated, and also, like you, operated in the pop space, like, played all the solos on all the pop records.
Yeah.
But then also played to a big audience as a front person. I think that's the mold.
That's actually a great parallel. It's interesting. Like the Sanborn model is probably one of the closest ways you could look at what I've done. And yet he wasn't somebody that was like, he wasn't my model. Like, of course I checked him out and was into him in different, I was definitely into Sanborn, but he wasn't like, I wasn't chasing, my sound is nothing like his sound. That wasn't my vibe, but definitely all of those things were similar. And like the way that Brecker worked with pop people and stuff, the same thing. I love playing in those contexts. I'm so comfortable in those musics or whatever, like way more comfortable than I am playing, some burnout jazz thing or some really like odd meter, like whatever. I aspire to be able to do those things. Like I want those skill sets. I want to be comfortable in those environments. And I think that having that as a bar that I'm always striving toward is what gives me the skill set to do all the things I do. But there's no questioning where I'm more comfortable for me personally. Mm-hmm. And like that is like, I just love being able to do whatever it is I do in those more groove pop settings, like kind of even with Snarky, like it's not a pop band, but it's kind of like in some ways it's like a pop instrumental jazz. I don't know what the hell, nobody knows what we call that thing, but you're playing to a lot of people and the melodies have like hooks that you can sing. And I love all that stuff. Like that's just completely meets me where I am coming from at my deepest level as a musician, as an instrumentalist. So, to be able to connect whether it was within John's band or, with Snarky and these situations, like I just really love that thing that happens when I'm not the front person, but the moment arrives and I get a turn to say something whether it was with Jonah or John Mayer or Snarky or like Larry Carlton or any of the people, that's a moment that I feel very comfortable in, getting to step out for for a little bit and, hey, I can say my thing and then I can kind of step back over here. It suits me really well. And I always knew that I just don't have the desire to be, yeah, like sometimes I am front and center for sure. And that's happened more and more in recent years with my own groups and stuff, but it's actually not where I'm way more comfortable when I get to do it as the sort of featured side person, I love that space.
With Snarky or with Larry Carlton or whatever, like it's maybe less like this, but I could imagine with Jonah or with John Mayer that you get to be kind of the freakiest element. You're the wild card when you step forward. Not that you started playing some crazy Ornette shit when you were soloing, but like you're the sort of the free agent in that space. You're the thing that might be different from gig to gig or night to night.
Yeah. And when I was growing up in late 80s and in the 90s and stuff, I always really liked the pop guitar solo, like the really cool solo that was short and sweet, 8 or 16 bar solo or something, the solo statement in a pop song. We don't really have that as much anymore, or maybe we do and I just don't know it, but it was definitely a thing back in the day. And I do often think of myself like a frustrated guitar player. Mm-hmm. So I love that idea of just like coming in and sort of making that really tight solo that just like checks all the boxes. And I have so many references I could give you of Branford Marsalis with Sting. Is some of my favorite Branford. He does all sorts of things so well, but some of my favorite is what he did with Sting because it's like, man, it checks all the boxes for me. The sound is gorgeous. The time is gorgeous. All the things he plays is sophisticated, but they never step too far out to where you're like, wow, that's weird and took me out of the music. They fit so completely with the tapestry of whatever's going on. I mean, you listen to, there's a solo on the Sting record. The Sting record is called The Soul Cages. Sure. There's a song called Mad About You. And Branford takes a solo on that song, and Sting he's singing a note and he's fading out as he's singing, and Branford on the soprano just dovetails in with the same exact note so that Sting fades out and Branford fades in. Up stole that and did that so much with John in various ways. Like, I love that stuff, and he plays the most beautiful things. It's just gorgeous. Like, that really gets me going. So that's just kind of where my heart is. And then it started with Jonah and stuff. I've always played with singers and enjoyed that. My mom is a singer. I mean, not professionally, but she was a really, really wonderful singer, and I just grew up around that. So I think I approached the saxophone to a large degree with that sort of mentality is like, it's just a way, I'm not a singer with my voice, but through this thing, that's where I can contribute, through this instrument. And so to be in a bar somewhere in Pennsylvania with Jonah, and then like it's my turn to do my thing, and like to be able to watch people having a conversation and like stop drinking their beer and look over and take notice, not because I was burning the house down with a bunch of notes, but hopefully inviting them into the conversation with the music. I don't know. I mean, it gets a little bit wonky to talk about, but whatever that space is, that connective space is a place that I really, really enjoy.
It feels very clear to me that you are as influenced by singers as you are by saxophone players in the way you write and play. It's funny when we were talking about LA, New York at the beginning of the conversation, and you said, your association with LA records were kind of like GRP, what we associate with the sort of smooth sounds of the 90s.
Yeah.
Because when I hear your solo records, I say this as a total compliment. I hear that that's where GRP could have gone,
Yeah.
in the sense that, as you described Snarky Puppy, we don't know, is it jazz, pop? It doesn't follow the conventions of fusion or smooth jazz,
Right.
both of which started to become codified in their production values and the sounds and the things that you would expect, certainly with smooth jazz, where the production has limited its ability to flourish in the sense of, okay, well, here's jazz that could be accessible to people who don't maybe feel comfortable in the 55 bar.
Right.
And you're making music that is accessible and it is melodic and it's still happening on a very high level of execution and concept, but it's not burdened by all of that production baggage that so much smooth jazz has. And so it was interesting when you said that, well, I didn't want to be making records like those GRP records, because I would say you kind of are, but in a new way.
No, that's deep. I totally appreciate what you're saying. It makes a lot of sense, because part of what I'm interested in, if it comes to making a record too, is a certain sonic aesthetic, a quality of the way the thing sounds, having a richness to it that you would also associate with records that are outside of the jazz world, the pop records and stuff. But there's this fine line. It's like, if all of a sudden now there's a percussionist playing a triangle, it's like, oh, you just went too far, Like, I don't know where that line is exactly, but there is a line. And I listened to, like, one of the other people that I loved, still love, but it was a big influence to me and my buddies in high school, was the saxophonist Kirk Whalum. Mm-hmm. Now that guy, he's in the smooth jazz realm, but I've always sort of put him in his own category. I know him and have heard him say this too. Like, his goal is to just be Donny Hathaway on the saxophone. I mean, he wants to be able to manipulate the saxophone like Donny Hathaway did his voice. And I think he does it. Like, nobody is more vocal on the saxophone to me than Kirk Whalum, and expressing like a singer and the deepest sort of humanity and nuance and through a saxophone in such a gorgeous way. So I was into those records and stuff too, but there's this line and it's just a personal thing. So for me, it's like, okay, I can appreciate all this sonically, but then the content maybe, all of a sudden that's too cheesy for my taste, But I do rub right up against it in some way. Like, I like good melodies. I like strong chord progressions. I like great grooves. I like these things. But I also like the sort of walking on a tightrope that you get with the best jazz, and the best jazz players. So I guess what I've been trying to chase down and continue to is like finding that line. Like, where's the place where you can mix really strong melodies that feel like, almost like they feel like a cover of something that was sung, if that makes any sense, backwards. Not sung backwards, but, they feel like they were a vocal melody to some degree. I mean, I think almost every song I've written, maybe every song, certainly I can sing the melody to. And I don't think I've ever written a song on the saxophone. It's never begun for me on the saxophone. It's either by voice or piano or some combination. But hopefully no matter where it begins, it's always has a vocal quality to it. So that's something that's important to me. And then, I love great pocket and grooves. Like, I could just, when that stuff is working and it's right, for me, fewer things are as fun as just sitting in it, just trying to engage with that groove as like a rhythm section player. I'm just a frustrated rhythm section player, basically. So I'm just like a frustrated everything except saxophone.
Yeah,
I'm a frustrated saxophone player too, let's be honest. But, I love those elements. So when it comes to writing music and making records or whatever, trying to figure out that lane, that space, and to your point about the GRP thing, they were making these really polished sounding recordings, but it was like a place where the musical content was maybe a little more prolific or deeper than just smooth jazz, but it was definitely also not sort of New York straight ahead jazz. The quality of the records was definitely at a really high level.
Well, that's what I'm thinking about. Just thinking out loud as we talk about it, one of the things that was happening there was that they were using the technology of pop record making to make instrumental music. And they would still feature solos, there would be improvisation, but it would be kind of in the context of, in the same way you describe wanting it to sound rich like a pop record or have some of those values. But one thing that I notice about you, and I wonder if it is the innovation of Snarky Puppy and the influence, is that like your most recent record was captured live in the studio.
Yeah.
Mike League really leaned into this thing about we're going to control it like a studio record, and it'll be composed and produced as if it were a record, but we're also going to introduce this live aspect of either inviting a small group of people into the studio or capturing it on video to make sure that it's clear that there's risk, there's risk involved.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
Maybe that's what makes those records, yours and his, sound the way they do, is that interplay.
Oh man, you're very astute observation. And the risk is, I'm not going to say it's everything, but it's a big part of it. That risk is, that's life right there. That's where the life comes into it. So I'm both scared of and love and sort of love being scared by that thing. That's the whole juice for me. That's like when I started playing the saxophone in junior high, all I wanted to do was play the concert band music different every time I played it. And the band director would always like demote me, to the last chair saxophone. I have this thing. It's like, I don't want to do it the same way twice. Not exactly. Maybe it'd be very similar, but to be able to change it, to be able to take that risk every time you play and have it be not know what it's going to be. That's amazing. And I think, as somebody who tends to get tied up in knots internally and certainly in my own head about things, that is something that this style of music, let's just broadly call jazz, in all these or improvisation, kind of forces me into a place where I can't go back and do it over. And that is something that I kind of need. Because I overthink everything, and I will just endlessly sort of get myself stuck about stuff. Well, there's a place and a platform where it's do or die every time, and so it's always scary. I'm always nervous to some degree, but it's like the good kind of nerves, and that element of risk, and especially what with these video albums that Mike League definitely, I would say pioneered to a large degree, and I certainly copied. The reason I copied it was because after going through that experience with Mike and with Snarky and experiencing that risk in a major way, like when we did that We Like It Here album, oh my God. That was like my first experience with the band other than sitting in with them twice. And it was all new music, and it was terrifying. And yet, every day that we were there, it was great because like it was such a camaraderie. And like I just kept like every day I would wake up and be like, are we really doing this? Like he's serious, but everybody seemed cool with it. And I'm like, okay, I guess we're dealing with this, And so going through that experience with those guys kind of showed me that, okay, there's going to be some, there's going to be some blunders or this, that, and the other is going to happen. But the risk reward is incredibly skewed if you have the right people and you know what you're doing to the reward side. And actually the risks in the right environment become part of the reward. And so like when I did the guitar band album, which we did at the Blue Whale in LA, that album with Mark Lettieri on guitar and Nir Felder on guitar and Kaveh Rastegar from Kneebody and other bands, and then Robert Sput Seawright on drums. What that was I was on tour with Snarky and Sput and Mark, and it was like November of the year prior. And I knew I had a gig the weekend of NAMM at the Blue Whale, and I didn't know what I was going to do with the night yet. And so I was out on the road with those guys and was just chatting in the green room one night with Mark, and I was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to be in town for NAMM, and a few people were going to be in town for NAMM. And I was like, well, maybe we can just do a thing. Let's just do a thing. And that's how it started. And then I was like, oh, maybe Mike, can play bass, but he had 5 other different things going on. And so I knew it was going to be Mark and Sput, and then Nir was like the year before had been in town. And so it just happened like, let's do this. And this will be crazy and fun. And then I was like, well, yeah, why not just like tape it, Mike League style, or whatever. And we had no rehearsal and we'd never played together before, the 5 of us. And Sput almost missed the gig because he was stuck at NAMM or got lost or something or both. And there barely wasn't even a sound check. At the last minute, we rearranged everybody into a circle just so that I could have eye contact with everybody, since there had been no rehearsal and no sound check. And yet here's a room full of people and there's cameras, and we were like, okay, let's do this. And we did it, and it was great. But certainly at the time, I remember just thinking, well, that was fun, but I'm never using any of that. That was where my head was at after. Like, I thought, just because all I could think of was like all the moments where I went left and they went right, or something should have happened and something else happened. And it took me like 3 months of distance. But when I listened to it and got past some of those little blunders or whatever that I thought were blunders, I realized, like, oh my gosh, there are some magic moments here, and things that you would never, ever, ever get, I don't think, without that level of risk. That high wire act that the audience and the band are simultaneously a part of. And as scary as that is, it's amazing.
So that's that record, is the one-off gig.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, we repeated the gig 3 or 4 years in a row after, just as an event, because that went so well. But that record is one night, that night that I just described. That's it. That's how it went down. It wasn't even meant to be a record. It was just doing it to get a couple to get some cool footage to put up on YouTube. Literally, my only thought was, I'm so tired of emailing my email subscribers about gigs they can't come to. You know, like, there's people on my email list from all over the world, and I don't want to be that person sending them out like the gigs I'm playing in Los Angeles when they're in Berlin. And so I thought, let me just get some video of this gig, and that will be something I can send to my email subscribers, put it on YouTube and say, like, hey, I know you can't come to the show or whatever, but like, here, enjoy this. That was the entire reason I did that. I had no idea that it was going to turn out like it did.
I get it, man. And sometimes you have to create conditions so that you can't take it back. I mean, that's what it is. Left to your own devices, you will agonize over it. So there has to be, you can't put that band together again anytime soon. So no takebacks. This is what it was.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I learned that from Mike League, man. He's my hero in so many ways. That dude is just he's a superhero, and I learned so much and continue to learn so much from him. I learned something from him every time I'm around him, and that whole sphere and all those players. But that particular session that we did, that We Like It Here record, taught me so much, because in fact there's a song on that record called Outlier that I took a solo on. And we did these songs every night for 4 nights. We would do two sets in the studio a night, and they would flip the audience. There's just a lot of stories about this record. The drummer, Larnell Lewis, was a last minute save because Sput got stuck with a passport issue, and Larnell learned the music on the airplane on the way over, and we'd never rehearsed. It was kind of similar to what I just described to you about my guitar band record. And through it all, Mike was totally cool, calm, and collected. Anyway, so we're playing the song. We did a lot of the material. We probably did it 6 to 8 times. We would do a set, turn it over, do another set, and we did that for 4 nights. And Mike explained, like, hey, so everybody knows, I'll take the best of what we get from any of these, but there will be no splicing. There's not going to be any cutting from one night to another. And just to make sure nobody gets any ideas, like, by changing the audience for each set, people had different clothes every night. Like, you couldn't have spliced together different cuts, basically. So we played that song a bunch of times, and there was one time out of 8 where, in a heated moment of interaction, playing with Larnell, my headphones just fell off. It was hot, they were sweaty, and they straight up fell off. And I thought, oh my God, I've just ruined this thing for everybody. We're making a studio record. Other than hearing the noise in the room, at that point, I couldn't hear anything that was going on. And I had a moment where I thought, what do I do? Do I stop? Like I had a whole discussion in my head in slow motion, I guess. And it was like, do I stop? Do I keep going? What have I done? How long has it been? Should I wait? It's not my thing. I can't, I got to keep going, and I just was going through these things. So there's this long pause and then I keep playing. And Mike Maher, the trumpet player who was standing next to me, just calmly reaches down off the floor and puts my headphones back on, and we just keep going. And at the end of the night, I was so embarrassed. I felt horrible. I just felt like I'd let everybody down. And the videographer, Andy, who put this whole thing together, he was like, man, that was so cool. He's like, I'm going to lobby for that to be the one. And I was like, no, what are you talking about? Andy, that was a disaster. You can't use that. He's like, no, you don't understand. That's YouTube gold right there. And I had no idea at that time what he was talking about. All I was thinking about was this odd gap of silence that was going to be in the thing I played. Anyway, it turned out he was exactly right. They obviously knew what they were doing. But I remember when they sent me the record to sort of preview, and I went right to that track to see what they took. And when I found out it was that one, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be so embarrassing. But it taught me so much about this concept, about risk, and sort of, like you said, you can't take it back. And like, so what if everything's not perfect? That's not the point, you idiot. Like the cool part is like the humanity, the life of it. Like that's the stuff, And for all the things that I mentioned about the guitar band record, like I had this list of mistakes. Nobody, knock wood, has ever pointed one of them out to me. Nobody ever found all these mistakes that I thought there were.
But don't you think that that's because in that context, mistakes are only in our heads? I mean,
Yes.
In order for other people to identify the mistakes, they would actually have to be inside your head.
Totally
and know
true.
that you think they're mistakes.
Yeah. When there's a record I made with Aaron Goldberg and Ruben Rogers and Obed Calvert. We made it in Brooklyn, actually, at Michael Brorby's place.
Yep.
And on the second day of recording, we came in and Obed was there early. He's a great drummer. He was listening to what we'd done the day before, and there was some track he soloed on. He had this amazing solo, my words, right? Like we certainly all thought that. And there he was early to the studio, like reviewing it, and it was bummed out, like, oh man, blah, 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 blah. And I forget if it was Aaron or Michael. Somebody said though, because Obed was like, don't use that, man. That's trash or whatever. We got to redo that. And probably Aaron was like, man, you're crazy. He's like, the only reason you think that is because you're the only one who knows what you intended to play. The rest of us just hear the result. And another beautiful gem of wisdom from Aaron.
It's so true. That's why we think it's a mistake, because it's not what we intended. But, I talked to Eric Harland last week, actually, for the podcast, and he said something interesting where he said, the universe doesn't care. Universe doesn't care. It's cool that you intended and you failed, but the universe does not care what you intended. And it was great. It's the same thing. So I've made reference to it a couple of times. I want you to just briefly, and anybody who wants to go deeper can see the video, but just as it's hard to believe that we're coming up on year 2 of COVID. And when the thing started, I reached out to a bunch of friends who had been on the road in various corners of the world and asked them what it was like to come off the road, because some people came home. I remember I talked to trombone player Ryan Keberly, who actually flew to France for a one-off gig after they had closed Broadway and schools and stuff. He went over for a 2-day thing. He managed to get in and out right before they shut everything down.
Wow.
So, some people in the States ended up kind of stuck and having to drive back from their gigs and their tours, and it just was a mess. And I was amazed that in all of that, I had not seen your video, which is like, it gave me such anxiety as you described it. And you describe going on practically a month-long tour. In Europe, you're there for a couple of weeks, I guess, on the crest of a wave, as you described it. Everywhere you went, it was like they locked the door behind you as you left.
Totally. That's exactly what happened. It was last February and March, and it began what would now be the time of year that we've been doing this ground up festival that Snarky Puppy puts together in Miami every year. And so that was early February. It was right around Valentine's Day, I suppose. So I went out there for a week. I was going to come home for 1 week in between and then go to Europe with my band. But an opportunity came up to go to do something in Japan in between, in that moment in between. So it was a full month on the road. I don't remember anybody in Miami talking about it. I'm sure we knew about it, but it just we weren't there yet. So we had this amazing festival. I flew home, packed up the next day, went to Japan for a week. And that's where it sort of began. And it was super quiet there. Like the hotel was quiet, like everybody, and they were wearing masks and such. It was just this very eerie feeling. But there was this, I was gonna say tour bus, cruise ship, the Crown Princess or something, that was all over the news. That was like ground zero for this thing. And they were parked off the coast of Japan somewhere. And every morning I would get the hotel paper, and look, and we were looking at numbers, and the numbers at that time, people were starting to get concerned about. We're talking about numbers like 140 cases a day, like 140. But the point is, at that moment, I knew I was on my way back to LA, only to head to Europe for 2 weeks with my band. And so I remember getting the paper one morning. It was the Wall Street Journal, and it was a picture of in Italy with like medical SWAT teams spraying places down. And I hadn't even gotten to Italy yet. And I'm, reaching out to people who are involved in putting the tour together, like, are we still doing this? Like, what's going on? And, so I went home, got home from Japan, and, then we turned around and went to Europe on, I guess it was the very end of February when we left LA. And we went to, I don't remember the exact sequence. We might have been in Italy first, but we were in Rome, we were in Sardinia, we were in, eventually we were in Madrid, and we were in the Netherlands, we were in Germany, and it just was getting worse and worse. It was the worst in Italy. This was that moment back in March, if you can remember, how just cosmically terrible it seemed. Like Italy was just like going off the deep end, and we were there. I mean, we were on the island of Sardinia for a few days, but it just kept cascading. Like the airports and airplanes kept getting quieter, fewer people. The reports were getting more and more out of control, and we were just like, what do we do? Where are we going? I was washing my hands like crazy. My skin was red from washing my hands. Like we just sort of felt like, okay. And every venue we kept saying, like, is it happening? And everybody was like, yep, it's still happening. We just day by day, we're going along. And Italy, within maybe 2 days of us leaving Italy, they like shut the borders and nobody was coming in, And then we were in Spain and we were in Madrid, and we played a few nights at a club there, and full show. Everything was fine, so to speak. And then I left to go to Germany, and again, a day or 2 days later, they closed Madrid, and then they closed Spain. Like everything stopped, all performances stopped, everything stopped, and they sort of stopped accepting, travelers. So yeah, each place that we went, it just felt like we were Moses in the Red Sea, like coming down behind us everywhere we went. And I got sick. I didn't know, what the heck. I assumed I was getting this thing because I had various symptoms and such, but it was right at the tail end, and we were in the Netherlands. There was like one or two shows. There were like 2 shows left to play. We canceled the last show. We made it all the way until I want to say it was like March 11th or something. We played a show in the Netherlands, and it was in Rotterdam. Uh-huh. That's where it was. We played this show, and that night I was awakened by my hotel phone ringing, not my cell phone, but the phone in the room, which is a weird thing these days. Cause like if you're on, nobody calls the hotel phone that's trying to get in touch with you. They call your phone. And it was 2:30 in the morning, and it was my piano, the guy playing piano with me, Ruslan Sirota. He was like, hey man, we got to go. Trump just announced like a ban on all flights, the European ban. It was just crazy. We didn't know what it was going to be, but at least 2 of the guys with me were not, I forget what they are, but they have visas, but they're not
foreign nationals.
Yes. Thank you. And also like I said, I'd been gone from home for a straight month. I was now sick, whether it was the flu or COVID or whatever, but I was like, I'm not getting stuck here for a month. It just felt like the world was ending.
One of the kind of final results of your story is that although it seemed like you had COVID, and I still sort of suspect that maybe you did, even though the testing revealed that you had something else, but what do I know?
Right.
But it turns out what they think you got was this weird version of the flu that you picked up in Spain. And the reason I like that so much is because I have lived in Spain and spent a lot of time in Spain, and I know Clamores, I know that club, and I know that type of club in Spain that turns from a jazz club into a disco. The Jamboree in Barcelona is like that. They love to do that. And it's so disconcerting. And as you describe, having to sell CDs and they turn up the disco super loud and you're yelling and it's just the beginning of COVID and you go to the bathroom and there's no soap in the bathrooms and it's like, fucking Spain. I love Spain. You know,
That's exactly
got to hand
right.
it to Spain. And that whatever you ended up with, whether it was COVID or this other weird version of the flu that they gave you there, it's like only in Spain are you going to get that experience.
Right. And so literally the test results said a strain of the Spanish flu, which now I know didn't actually originate from Spain, but whatever, that's what they call that version of the 1918 flu. So apparently I got some sort of ancestor version of the Spanish flu, probably at those 2 nights in Madrid under those conditions.
And in a weird way, it was kind of reassuring. It was like, even though COVID is going on all over the world and everything's crazy, like maybe you did just pick up some weirdness anyway. Maybe what it was is just some weird Spanish nightclub flu that you got, Bob Reynolds, it's been such a pleasure. Is there anything else we should cover before we wrap it up?
I've already said too much. But thank you for chatting with me and having me on, Leo. It's been really cool.
This has been such a treat for me, man.
Awesome.
Thanks. There he was, my friends. Bob Reynolds. Heart on his sleeve, saying it like it is, asking the questions, running the changes. I'll be back again before you know it with another deep dive. Until then, I'll talk to you soon.